a case study that I'm going to talk through when I worked with a prior retail organization and our introduction of Agile and DevOps and what we went through to get to that point. So follow along with me. We'll have a great time this morning. So when I looked at this, I tried to look to say, how can someone take this and re-adopt it into their organization? And I tried to find ways that you go from the current state to that future state. And then we want that to be a diagonal line to go quickly and smoothly. It doesn't always work that way. So I looked through and thought, well, what are the transitions that we took to get to that point? And these are some of the steps that we went through to get eventually to that future state of productivity. So understanding where you are. I look at that as being one of the key points of introduction of any change, including Agile and DevOps. It's something that if you don't know where you are, what tools you have, what the organization can handle, the structure, the roles and responsibilities, all that's so critical in taking that next step and really expanding to say, how do we then apply those concepts into our environment? So again, some of the things that we did, or some of the things that I did, was take a look at that environment. And just to give you some backdrop, it was sponsored by one of the development VPs within our organization. We were focusing on the e-commerce area, specifically for Agile rollout. And the reason why we wanted to do the e-commerce area was because we wanted to get to either daily or weekly installs or updates to our production environment in order to stay current with other marketing areas. And it's important when you're in retail, if you're, or especially in e-commerce, you have to have that current, crisp view. Everything needs to be fresh. And at the present time, we were doing maybe monthly or bi-monthly updates, which it was too long a time frame. And the marketing team and the e-commerce team said, we got to be a lot more faster with this. So the development VP took me aside and said, hey, we need to start rolling this out, rolling out the concepts of Agile, rolling out the concepts of DevOps. And I did have the CIO approval, though there were specific guidelines I needed to follow in the rollout process, such as not changing roles in regards to a business analyst, a developer, a quality assurance person, project managers / scrum masters should be one of the same. So some little nuances like that, but it worked, it worked the way we needed it to work for us. And I guess I look at any methodology or any approach that you take, though there are many books on the shelf, you could take a book and say, steps 1 through 99, these are all the steps that we need to do to apply that concept. I always look at it as you need to understand that environment first and what can that environment handle. Every company adopts Agile or different methodologies to their unique situation, whether it be security, whether it be auditing concerns, et cetera. And that's one of the things that we took a look at when we were rolling out Agile for us. So again, that's some of the background on what I was looking at, what the purpose of rolling out Agile and DevOps was for our particular organization. So again, we looked at the current skills and abilities. Did anyone know Agile? There were a couple of us that came from a prior organization that had Agile background. We weren't so much into the DevOps, but we did do Agile, and we did have some background in the DevOps. So there was some skills there. We also wanted to pull in a third party. So we brought in a third party expert that did a lot of Agile introduction to organizations, so that we had that all the training material was prepared. They showed exactly how you should run things, what all of the different steps you take, the user stories, how they were built and all that stuff. So we didn't have to build the training material ourselves. So that helped us out tremendously. Taking a look at the projects, the programs, the portfolio, that was important because we wanted to make sure that we weren't impacting the overall portfolio, where we needed to be at the end of the year or at the end of the quarter. We didn't take any projects that were currently in flight and turn them into Agile, though I know many project managers said, hey, take my project, I want to be Agile. I'm like, no. Finish up what you're doing in Waterfall. We'll pick you up the next phase as that project is closed. So I pulled out a handful of project managers, and just to give you an example of it, I had over 1,000 people in IT, 125 project managers reporting up into my area. So it was a bit. I had a lot to choose from, but again, I tried to focus on the pilot, which was e-commerce, and I tried to focus on those PMs that I knew that had the adaptability and the interest in changing and learning Agile, and that's really where my focus was. When I looked at outlining the BAU operations, we needed to make sure that as we were rolling this out, that we were impacting how we currently ran our business. Our business as usual needed to be maintained. So as we still had, the e-commerce site needed to still be operational. As we had projects going in, we still needed to have a team that was working on that if anything went down. So we had to keep that BAU going, even though we were going through change from an Agile to DevOps situation. Review the internal external drivers. As I mentioned, internal drivers, our development VP said, hey, this is the direction we want to take. Externally, from the market standpoint, again, being in retail, we needed to make sure that we stayed current with our e-commerce site. And it was robust, it was adaptable, it could be updated at a moment's notice. And then validate the commitment from the leaders. And we definitely had that commitment. I think that's important. Has anyone introduced Agile out here? Okay, so how important was getting that leadership buy-in to that approach? It's critical, right? Because if you don't have that leadership buy-in, you're basically saying, well, I'm going to run with this, but if I don't have that support, it can quickly be squashed. And that's something that very easily can happen. They need to be understanding the buy-in. And one of the things, and I'll talk about that in a bit, one of the things that I found critical in that buy-in, so when I was working with the CIO, I was constantly showing her updates to say, this is the progress, this is what we've done, this is what it used to look like, and this is how far and how fast we can run in the Agile environment. And it wasn't necessarily doing the 80-hour weeks, like I know that was the mindset of the developers. I'm like, no, this needs to be sustainable. We need to continue to be able to maintain the work and the rate of speed that we're running, even though we're in an Agile environment. So we were getting more done quicker, the turnaround was a lot faster, and that's what I had to show to the CIO, because eventually my goal was to take Agile out of that pilot and roll it across to all of the IT organization. So identifying the problems. Now that we understood the environment, it's really understanding where the problems lie. So if we're trying to be agile, we're trying to be quick, we're trying to have that continuous integration, we're trying to ensure that we have that seamless flow between business to development into production. That was where that next state takes place, which is really understanding what problems are limiting us from doing that. So one of the things that I looked at is we needed to be very quick to identify the problems and solve them. So it's getting the right people in the room at the right time. It's not just saying, okay, well, let's take the expert. No, it's taking a group of individuals from across the organization, whether it's the operations team, whether it's the developers, whether it's the business. We had a lot of different individuals involved at different times to say, okay, let's take a look at that daily integration. At first, operations was like, no, we're going to continue to do our job the way it was before. Even though you're doing daily integrations, whatever, we're going to, handhold it just the way we always did. And soon they found that that was a lot more than what they could handle. We came to a lot of discussions, and part of it was bringing in some of the management or leadership of those groups to say, look, this isn't working. We need to find a way to solve this. And that's saying, what are you willing to give us as a development team to say, what can we do? What are you giving us as ownership and security rights that isn't going to impact or negatively impact any of the other environments or any of the other groups within IT? And we came to points of they'll oversee some of what we did versus giving us full authority. And that's where that significantly helped us. Though they were involved in every daily stand-up, they were involved in all of our planning meetings, they could see what was coming, they felt comfortable with our approach, but it took time. It didn't happen overnight because, again, coming from that environment, development was development, operations was operations. You own your own things, and there's a clear view of roles and responsibilities. Does anyone ever have any difficulties in that transition? Okay, yeah, so you're familiar with what I'm talking about. It does take time, and again, I think a lot of it is getting that involvement, getting that trust to occur, and once that trust was there, they were able to, relinquish some controls and do more of the overseeing from the operations standpoint rather than managing every task for us. So that helped us out with decisions, acting quickly, making sure that the impact of the decisions was accurate. Again, we didn't want to impact anyone else. We didn't any other IT projects. We didn't want to impact production, of course. We didn't want to impact any disaster recovery environment. So all that was very critical to our process. We also looked at the budget, the timelines. We wanted to make sure that we weren't costing more time, costing more effort by doing Agile. We wanted to make sure that, hey, if this wasn't working, let's take that particular user story or feature function out. Let's move it to the next sprint. Let's make sure that we're not we're doing too heavy of effort in one sprint that we can't get it done. Again, quality was certainly of the essence. Anyone familiar with project portfolio management here? And the concept of making sure that this is my end result that I want at the end of a quarter, end of the year, and all the projects that I have that usability is going to continue to develop on throughout the life of that portfolio. So we needed to be also very aware of the usability, and I know I talk about that a little bit later on. Those are some of the things when we say impact, my budget, my timeline, my objectives. I want to make sure that every project we did, we still had that end goal, that end result that we needed so that the next project that came in could pick up where that usability left off and extend it more. Next area was making sure that we had the vision. And again, vision is critical because we needed to make sure that, for one thing, everyone was in sync with where we were headed. Again, our objective, the common goal we had was to have either daily, weekly, or at max bi-weekly implementations, bi-weekly upgrades. Going from a month to 2 month upgrade to bi-weekly to a weekly, that was a big jump. I mean, it took a lot of effort to get us to that point, but that was the vision that we all had, and we had to make sure that we maintained that vision. That was our goal. That was something that we were working for. Everyone needed to be on board with that. Offering the direction and the innovations and ideas. One of the things that I appreciated was that the development staff was constantly looking for ways to make things better. How do we make this easier? What problems are we facing and how do we make that easier? So I relied on them a lot to find the right tools, to find the right approaches, to simplify things. They had the education training. We gave them training as well on how to make sure that there's a continuous integration so they understood the concept and process. They understood what some of their roadblocks were, and we relied on them to work with us from a management standpoint, work with the operations team to say what are they willing to handle from a security standpoint to ensure that this ran a lot smoother than what some of the bumps that we're running into. Promoting that team commitment, again, I worked with the project managers, I worked with the project teams. I tried to make sure that everyone understood and was engaged with what we were doing. The IT, like I said, the CIO was heavily looking at this project and this initiative that I was running and wanted to make sure that it was successful as well. We had good backing, but it was, again, keeping that commitment going. If I ran into problems, I think one of the things that a couple of the project managers were doing, they would not go to the last day of the sprint, kind of reviewing what did we do well, what didn't we do well. They didn't do that, and they kept running into the same mistakes that next one. Such a simple thing. Why do we need to take time to talk about what we did well, what we didn't do well? I'm like, because you don't know how you're continuing to make those same mistakes. And one of the things I tried to look at is saying that Agile is so quick to begin with, and I'm not saying we're running at the speed of light, but it's very fast. You go from idea to design to development to testing to implementation at a very quick rate. In that case, you have to learn much faster than you would in a normal project. A waterfall project, everyone's probably familiar with that. You have an idea, you scope it out, you design it, you re-scope it out because things change, Eventually you get to development, eventually get to production, but here you're going very fast. So that process of learning must also take place. So one of the things I found out was that I needed to make sure that they were committed to the process. And even though it didn't feel comfortable sitting around talking about what we did well, what we didn't do well, we found that that was one of the most valuable things that they could do to learn from the mistakes of the past, which one of the things that they ran across was taking on more work than what they could handle. They would take on, and I understand that every project team in an Agile environment identifies user stories differently. They would take on close to 300 story points for a 5-man team, and it was just more than what they could handle. It was just the way they were defining story points. It was, you guys have to take on what you can take on, and again, learn from what's not going well with the project. Introducing the organizational values, again, making sure that they were committed from that standpoint, increasing the, again, competition in the local and global marketplace, which was what we needed, and again, promoted by the leaders. So. Can't stress that enough. That leadership engagement and buy-in it was critical for the project. So change. change is essential. If you can't go through change, it's going to be very difficult. You're going to maintain the way you did it before, and it's not always going to work. One of the things that I see when we look at change is if I can take out the way we used to do it before and we don't do it that way anymore, I eliminate that tool, that process, that approach, we now are forced to do it the new way. And that's one of the ways I found it to be successful. But I look at change breeds innovation. And somewhere between that current state and that future state, between chaos and stability, that's where innovation comes. And I look at innovation as, again, relying heavily on the team, what's working, what's not working. The developers, I said, they were a key asset to making this work. Operations too, because I mean, they were the ones that had to understand what they could let go of, what they were willing to part with, what they were willing to oversee rather than manage. That was critical as well. But also just every person on the team, just helping them to understand how their new role was changing and what their new approach looked like. And that's where innovation comes in. Like I said, that was one of the keys that I found to making this work as well. Other things that I found important were the decision analysis process and just understanding what are the pros and cons to what we're doing. You know, are we ready for it? Does everyone have the knowledge of it? Do we have the tools that we need? Are we successful with what we do? What's working, what's not working? But also looking at what are the risks? What are the outcomes that we're trying to get at? And making sure that we had a clear view of all aspects when we were making decisions so that the decisions that we were making were accurate, they were right, they were working for us. And then moving beyond the chaos. So moving beyond chaos was critical, again, because if you let chaos stay the way it is, people tend to get comfortable. Well, that's just how mucked up it is, we'll just stay with it. Well, that's not really the right way to do it. We have to move that beyond chaos to get some to simplify things, making sure that we recognize those problems that we're running into and working through a more corrective approach. So again, change leadership was involved, bringing the team together, helping them understand what was working, what wasn't working. I did a lot of assessments, like I said, of the teams, of the projects, of the development groups, the operations group, and I used that when eventually I took that pilot and rolled it out so that I had a very crisp project, a very crisp approach, a very crisp methodology going beyond that initial pilot. Identifying the problems immediately. Anytime there was an issue that came up, we made sure that we took a look at it. We tried to understand what's the best way to solve this? What's the best way to address the issue? Monitoring progress, again, continuing that monitoring progress, continuing to provide the reports up through management so that there was a visibility to the success that we had. Again, decision making, I mentioned that. And then just managing the issues, risks, and changes that went about. If we found that things weren't working well, what do we need to do to solve them? How do we need to fix it? Whether it be the integration process, whether it be the code assessments, whether it be the tools that we had, all that was critical. And then just ways to ensure that we have that traceability. Again, from a management standpoint, though I had walked in the development shoes for many years, I'm more on the management process improvement side right now. One of the things that I found critical throughout the process is keeping people focused on that goal, keeping people focused on that visibility. Again, looking at it from a project portfolio standpoint, I needed to make sure that the end goal, the end state of the product, the end state of the tools that we were building met the usability that we expected. Because if we didn't, again, we were going to be off, and every project that was introduced or every new sprint that was introduced, it was relying on existing functionality that may or may not have been there. So that was one of the key considerations. Also the scope, the timeline, and the budget. You know, you get any one of those off and your portfolio is going to be sunk. And then it's going to be difficult to say, yes, this was a success management, but yet we overshot the budget. You know, we were too late on the timeline, and our scope, well, it's not quite the functionality that you expected. So it was critical for us to ensure that those features, functions were important and monitored and managed. When you're going through that much change, a lot of times the Scrum Masters / project managers, they were the ones that were so into the weeds, learning and growing and developing the projects as we went on. But I needed to, and someone needed to take a look at the bigger picture. How are we doing overall? And how do we make sure that this is a success and that we are still staying on track with all those things? And we met the end goal. So components to support a culture of change. When we look beyond the change that we introduced, It was just how do we make sure that we're continuing that culture of change? And one of the things I look at is, again, a summary of the application of change is, again, that vision. We had the vision, making sure that we had the plan, that we materialized the plan. We had, again, rolled it out. The VP of development said this is what we need to do. CIO was on board with that. We got the departments involved that needed to be involved, the operations team, the development team, all of the different roles and responsibilities. Everyone had a very, they were engaged, they were a part of the process. We took a look at how we were going to roll it out, how we were bringing the business in. We had some difficulties with the business because they had their own 9-to-5 job to bring on, and to become into Agile was a little bit more difficult. So we made sure that there was ways that we had product owners that could be represented from the business side throughout the process, but then also we gave them the capabilities to say, if there's limitations in your time, what can you give us, or what can you give the product owner that's acting on your behalf decision-making authority, so that if you can't be there all the time, where's that limitation, where's that stopgap? So we made sure that that was there as well, and then just, again, achieving that vision and making sure that there were rewards. There were just rewards at the end for the successes that we had. So that's kind of a summation of it. Prerequisites for change, we talked about this as well, unlocking that potential capability, making sure that we're extending individuals. I looked at the process itself. It was really a growth opportunity for a lot of the individuals. And I think it was great because they learned how to adapt to a more, again, that continuous integration type environment. They learned how to do things a lot quicker. They were a lot smarter. They asked a lot better questions. They were engaged with the business a lot more. The business was more engaged with the development. They were hand and foot with us. They knew exactly what was going in, what they liked, what they didn't like. It does take a bit. I mean, that first sprint is going to be difficult. The first couple of sprints are going to be difficult, but eventually you get into a pattern, and it worked out well for us. I also like this approach too, is plan, do, act, check, act. A very good approach for continuous improvement. We wanted to make sure that we didn't just say, okay, this is the way it is. It worked for us. It's going to be great for every other development team within IT. We didn't, I wasn't going to take that approach. I'm always looking for ways to make sure that what we're doing makes sense. And if it does need to change, that we're taking a hard look at it to say, why does it need to change? What problems are we running into? Is this the right impact? How is this going to impact, like, the merchandising team versus the e-commerce team? Is everyone going to be accepting of this? Or are there different strategies that we need to take for each team? So we had to looked at it from that perspective as well. So the question that I have for you is, do you know where you're going based on your vision and direction with your organization? I'll open it up for any questions.